Today, I'm going to be talking about the complexity of the Spanish language. Over 7,000 languages spoken worldwide, and Spanish is just one of those languages. Although Spanish itself is usually referred to as one language, it contains many dialects with unique ways of speaking that have been established from geography, migration, and history. Spanish-speaking countries may share similarities, but these dialects have evolved differently due to the distance many are separated by. The further apart a place is, the bigger the difference in their speech. This is the reason that Guatemala, which is in Central America, is very different from Chile, Argentina, and Peru, which are located in South America, and Cuba in the Caribbean. Much of this derives from amalgamation, which are just interactions between members of distinct ethnic and cultural groups, which decrease boundaries between groups as time passes, which is shown specifically through the blending of indigenous, European, and African languages. When Spanish began to spread through the Americas, the language present didn't vanish in one swoop. Instead, many of these places mixed with local languages, which created new pronunciations, vocab, as well as grammar patterns. The variety of dialects indicates that a shift in cultural contact within different countries. Colonialism has shaped much of how the world looks like today, as Europe controlled more than 85% of the world at one point. The spread of Spanish spread through military conquest as well as settlements, but there were millions of indigenous languages already present. Instead of completely disappearing, many of these indigenous languages blended with Spanish, amalgamation that still influences words spoken without many even realizing where its origin is today. Unfortunately, the variety of fluent spoken indigenous languages is rapidly declining. The five countries I chose to focus on are Cuba, Guatemala, Argentina, and Peru, which all have their own distinct dialects that were influenced by the mixture of indigenous, African, and European languages. Cuba. Starting off with Cuba, whose Spanish was heavily influenced by the Canary Islands and Andalusia, which is both right here. Moreover, there isn't just one Cuban dialect, since some areas have heavy African descent and other areas have more known Spanish, which again creates a separate dialect. Guatemala. Spanish here is thought to be slower and clearer compared to other Spanish-speaking countries. The language itself has connection to Spain Spanish and numerous Mayan and indigenous languages, which has strongly shaped slang and expressions. Argentina. Their Spanish was heavily influenced by indigenous languages, Spanish colonization, as well as the increase in Europe immigration. Just like other Spanish-speaking countries, before they were colonized, Argentina had many indigenous people that spoke different languages and performed their cultures in different ways. Later on, the Spaniards brought their language when they arrived in Argentina, which made Spanish increasingly more common to be spoken. In more recent times, within the 19th and 20th century, mass amounts of European immigration, especially from Italy, Spain, and France, impacted the language. Chile. Before colonization took place, the land inhabited people of the Mapuche tribes, which still inhabit much of the island to this day and influence the language as well. Peru was home to many indigenous cultures, including the Quechua, one of the 51 different groups present. Colonization affected their lifestyle as many were forced to do labor. During colonization, mining, which is an important part of Peru's economy today, exploited indigenous, also known as mitayos, and African laborers, which laid the foundation of Spanish colonial wealth at the time. Many of these workers, over 8 million workers, died in the work sites, which made it earn the name of Mines of Death. Pronunciations. Cuba. Compare To other Spanish dialects, Cuba is known to be one of the harder dialects to understand because they tend to pronounce their R's as L's. Let's take, for example, the word meat, which is pronounced carne, but they say carne. Words that would usually end with ado or ada would actually have the D removed. Taking, for example, tired would be cansado or cansada, would instead be cansa o cansao. Moving on to Guatemala. The letter X is pronounced with a sh sound, which actually connects to Mayan culture. Let's take, for example, the city in Guatemala, which is spelled Xela, would be said as Shela. Moving on to Argentina. Aspiration with using the letter S is common, meaning that the way it is spoken becomes softened, making the pronunciation sound more like a H. Take, for example, something that would usually be said as las cosas, meaning the things, would be la cosa or la cosas. The use of the double L in many Spanish-speaking countries sounds similar to a Y, but in Argentina, it can have a sh or j sound. For example, the word to call, meaning llamar, would be llamar or llamar. Now moving on to Chile. Words that contain a ch are replaced with the English sh sound. Take Chile, for example, would be spoken as Chile. Words that end in von, the letter V would be dropped. Take, for example, the word huevón, meaning lazy. The letter V would be dropped to sound like weyun. And lastly, with Peru, compared to other dialects, Peruvians tend to be more clear, which makes it easier for beginners to understand them. Whenever they are talking to someone informally and use usted, they tend to soften or drop any words that end with an S or a D. Take, for example, calidad, which means cool, would be calidad. Moving on to vocabulary differences. Let's take, for example, straws. In Cuba, it would be absorbente. In Guatemala, it would be pajilla. In Argentina, it would be sorbete or pajita. In Chile, it would be bombilla or pajita. In Peru, it would be cañita. And another vocab difference is popcorn, which would be Cuba, would be rositas de maíz. In Guatemala, would be poporopo. In Argentina, would be pochoclo or pororo. In Chile, would be cabritas. And ultimately in Peru, would be canchita. Now moving on to grammar differences. In Cuba, when speaking, they tend to drop the R sound in their words, such as, take for example, this tie would be corbata, but to them would be cobata. And in Guatemala, usted, which is usually used towards older individuals or people you should respect, tú is more of a friendly manner of speaking, and vos is used when with people you are very comfortable with. If you're talking to a teacher who you just met, it is very unlikely and impolite to be referring to them as vos. Argentina. The use of vos is more common here, instead of using tú, which is used to refer to a person. The shift of using vos instead of using usted changes the way the verb is spoken next. Let's say, for example, you are would usually be tú eres, but for them would be vos sos. Then we moving on to Chile. They tend to repeat their personal pronouns. Take, for example, I came to look for her would usually be la vine a buscar, but for them would be la vine a buscarla. They also shift the verb when using tú. Take, for example, to walk, it would be tú caminas, and to them would be tú caminai. In Peru, we have, just like Guatemala, it is common for them to use tú when talking to someone informally, such as a friend or sibling, while usted is used when talking to someone who should be respected. They also tend to use what is called diminutives, which are ito and ita, which add more affection to objects or things. Like, say, for example, coffee would usually be café, would be cafecito. The different dialects shown here indicate that the different dialects represent the history and blending of people. Every country's use of Spanish allows anyone to see where they're from and how their culture has shaped them. Spanish presents amalgamation, where a mixture of indigenous, European, and African worlds have been carried through generations. Thank you.